probably going to stay down here just knowing me. I like to wander. And that looks like a death sentence if I wander up there. So I'll be down here wandering for the safety of myself. So throughout this week, the goal is to talk about two things. Some head things and some heart things. The head things are understanding how the Bible's put together, understanding how it's intended to be used, and we talked about that in the class period some. We're going to talk about some heart things. Because you've got to combine those two in order to be faithful to God. There are plenty of examples in the Bible of people who got the head part right, but had the heart part wrong. Or people who had the heart part right and had the head part wrong. It is a combination of spirit and in truth. And even as we sing, we have the same thing. Colossians 3:16 says that we should admonish one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, making melody in our hearts to God. So if you sing the song, the head part is we're singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. That's the thing, right? We're not picking up the latest Taylor Swift song. But the heart part is making melody where? In the heart. Let's be both of those things. And your whole life is trying to marry those two things together. Giving my heart to God and giving my mind. And if you don't believe me, what's the first and greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, your strength. I want to give him all of them. So we're going to be talking about those two parts. So this morning, we're going to talk about the heart. And we're going to talk about it specifically in terms of the idea of conviction versus convenience. Conviction and convenience are opposite ends of the spectrum. When I do something that is for convenience, it is a preference that if given enough pressure, I would change. But I'm doing it that way to make life easier for me. I understand, and I know people who have enough conviction on frugality that they will look up, there are apps on your phone where you can look up all the different prices for gas in the area. And you can drive, and maybe you're one of these people, and if so, no judgment, I am just lazier than you. Where you look up, okay, the best price for gas is here, so I will time it and work it so that I'm at that gas station to fill up my tank with gas. And so you have a conviction, I'm going to save $1, I'm going to be a good steward of money, and okay, this is one way I can do that, and so I'm going to get the cheapest price on gas. You know how I do it? I'm running low. What gas station is closest? I'm going to pay whatever it is. And yes, I understand. I have paid extra. Look, that's a 35-gallon tank on that van out there. I believe I have paid more than I ought to. That convenience is worth something to me. Right? I had a grandmother who clipped coupons for everything. And she was fastidious about it. I remember as a kid vividly, I would go into when we were visiting my grandmother, we would go into her kitchen, and she had this kitchen, and she always woke up every morning, she had a house coat on. I don't even know if people even do that anymore, but she had a house coat. My grandmother would have her house coat on. She'd be sitting at the kitchen table, and she would have the papers open, and she would be clipping, physically making coupons. And she had a little billfold that she kept them all in, all organized, eggs, milk, meat, all of these things, and she would keep all of these coupons, and she would use it. And she was fastidious about it, that she was going to save money. You will never see me do that. Now, I'll save money in other ways, but I'm not a coupon clipper. It's inconvenient. And it's not worth my time. That's my view. All of us have things that we do for convenience, or things that we don't do for convenience. Conviction is the opposite of that. Conviction is something that I say, even if it is inconvenient, no matter how inconvenient it is, I will do it. Let me give you a hypothetical example. I have a dog, Bear, about 5 pounds. She's a very tiny little dog. I've always had bigger dogs. This is the first dog we've ever had. That's a small dog. She's a companion dog. She's a cavadoodle, so this mix between a King Charles Cavalier and a poodle, and she's very foofy and not my kind of thing. But But she's very sweet. I will say, for a companion dog, like these lap dogs, never had a lap dog in my whole life. It's nice having a dog that just like wants to be around you and isn't always needing me to play fetch with it and teach it tricks. And every time she does something wrong, I just pick her up. It's like, stop doing that. You know, when you have a Bernese mountain dog, you don't do this. I like the dog. I like the dog a lot. If you came in and said, and my kids love the dog. If you came in and said, look, how much for the dog? I said, the dog's not for sale. You offered me $5. No, I'm not. Offer me $1,000. I don't think I'd give her to you for $1,000. You offer me $1 million, all yours. I don't have that kind of conviction. But you come in and you offer me money for one of my kids. There is no dollar figure you can hit. There's a difference. Conviction versus convenience, conviction versus preference. It makes a difference. What one of those is your faith? We live in a convenience society. Everything is instant gratification. I don't like even going to the store when I can just have Amazon drop it off. I mean, they bring it from the rainforest and it's there in 2 days. It's amazing, right? We live in a convenience society. We have convenience stores, all in one shopping. Go to this place and we have everything you'll need. You don't need to go to 2, 3, 4, 5 stores. It's all here at this one store. Convenience. We try and make things as easy as possible. When I was a child, we had things called maps. And you had to look up addresses. And now I have a phone. And I don't know ever where I am. You know what I'm saying? If you use GPS enough, I have been to Florida, and I always use the GPS when we're in Florida traveling. I have been to Florida dozens of times at this point in my life. I've been to Florida. I have no idea how to get around in Florida because I just do whatever Google tells me. Convenience, I used to know where stuff was because I had to read a map. We are in a convenience society. And that's a problem for Christianity. Because Christianity is not convenient at all. And when you're talking about something like following Jesus, where Jesus says things like, take up your cross and follow after me, is that convenience or conviction? We have moved into a world, and you see it in the religious world as a whole. They tried to make Christianity convenient. More and more churches are trying to figure out how to make it convenient. They've done it. It's like, hey, come to our church, and we got coffee out here in the foyer. You could just come in bleary-eyed, not even listen to the preacher, and we'll caffeinate you. Hey, I know it's inconvenient to bring your kids to services, so we have this daycare service over here, and they'll just take care of it for you. I know it's inconvenient for you to go to services, so we just skip out on the sermon altogether. We'll sing a song or two. There'll be a rock band, and the guy gets up, tells jokes for about 5 minutes, and then we're done. We'll make it as convenient as we can for you. There are drive-through churches now. You realize that? Just drive up. You get a little bit of like whatever you can do in a drive-through church service, and then you're out. We've tried to make religion convenient, and we're really good at it. And the only thing that we've lost is Jesus. It's the only thing we lost out of the deal. The only thing that matters is the only thing we don't have anymore. Your life, your joy, your salvation is completely dependent on one of these two words being your guiding light in your spiritual journey. Your spirituality is either a matter of conviction or it is a matter of convenience. Now, it might be a strong convenience preference. But if there is a dollar figure on your faith, the devil will write that check. It has to be priceless. Right? I really like my dog. will make all the difference. It'll make all the difference in how you live. When things get hard, do you lean into the heart of your Christianity, or do you buckle? When it becomes inconvenient to go to services, or inconvenient to help Christians, or inconvenient to mention Jesus, because Jesus says, confess me before men, and I'll confess you before my Father in heaven. Deny me before men, and I'll deny you before my Father in heaven. When it becomes inconvenient for you to be a Christian and to talk and act like a Christian because it will put you on the outs of society or culture or work or whatever it is, you either lean into that because it's conviction, or you buckle. Your entire spiritual life comes down to one of these two words. So let's talk about conviction. And we're talking about this now, and we're going to talk about it more this evening. This evening, I'm actually going to talk to you a little bit about the problems with conviction and why sometimes we don't want to be convicted people because we've seen where conviction goes wrong. We'll talk about that a little bit. But this morning, let's just look at some examples in the Bible of people and conviction. Hebrews 11 was just the text that we read. I don't know if you guys planned that, somebody looked at my slides, or it just happened that the text that we read was Hebrews 11. What more shall I say? For time will fail me if I tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, for weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, not convenient torture, not accepting their release, so that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonments. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. Not convenient, that being sawn in two thing. They were tempted. They were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated. Men, one of my favorite passages in all the Bible. Men of whom the world was not worthy. You are not worthy of what Jesus did for you. You can never earn your salvation. You're never going to be good enough so that you can look at what Jesus paid on the price for you and say, yep, that was the right price. I'm worth that. No, it's the right price to God because he loves you that much. But you can never be worthy of God's sacrifice for you. But you can be more worthy than the earth deserves. That's what he says, is you can be better than this earth. You run into people like that once in a while. And you're like, they were just a different caliber of human. They were the kind of person that you wish you would grow up and be. They're the kind of people you go to their funeral and people tell you the things, they begin to talk about the things they did with their life and the way that they lived, and you go, man, if the world was full of people like this, it'd be heaven. Do you understand that's the point? When we get to heaven, that world, that new heaven and new earth, you know who it's going to be full of? People of whom this world was not worthy. People who lived by conviction. People who were willing to wander in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. People who were willing to sacrifice for their faith. People who put hope in eternal things over earthly things. And they knew it was hard, and it didn't make it less hard because they knew it. But it gave them an anchor that they lived by. Conviction is the idea of living in such a way that you understand whatever the cost is, it will be worth it. We do not follow cleverly devised tales when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. But we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For when he received honor and glory from God the Father, such an utterance as this was made to him by the majestic glory, this is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. And we ourselves heard this utterance made from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain. So we have the prophetic word made more sure, conviction. To which you do well to pay attention as to a lamp shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. But know this, first of all, that no prophecy of Scriptures is a matter of one's own interpretation. For no prophecy was ever made by an act of human will, but men moved by the Holy Spirit spoke from God. Peter saw the transfiguration. Peter, James, and John accompanied Jesus up on a mountaintop. And they saw Jesus transfigured and him speaking with Moses and Elijah about his kingdom that was to come. Those men saw it, and they heard the voice that said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." And then Peter went out, and what kind of life did he live? A life of conviction. He didn't cut corners in his life. Did he make mistakes? Yeah. We remember a lot of mistakes that Peter made. But then when he made those mistakes, he made a course correction. He lived his life passionately. I love the scene of Peter and the other apostles when they're in the boat and it's Jesus is raised from the dead, but it's during that 40-day time period where he's appearing to them periodically. And Jesus is on the beach, and he tells them to cast their net on the other side of the boat. They don't know it's Jesus yet, and then they cast the net on the other side of the boat, and they pull up all these fish so much so that it's like the net's going to break. And Peter says, "It is the Lord." And what does he do? The boat's not far from shore. He waits, right? Says, "Hey, look, it's only 100 yards or so. Let's get in and see him. That way we stay dry." No. Peter doesn't do that. Peter is so convicted, so passionate about the Lord that he throws on his outer garment and dives into the water. I always imagine he gets to shore like maybe 30 seconds, a minute before the other guys. But it's worth it. Because what would you give for a minute with the Lord? What would you give for a minute with your Savior? That's conviction. Peter lived a life of conviction. And the way you raise your kids, the way you interact with people at your job, the way that you interact with Christians, the words that you say carefully or carelessly should be guided by conviction. You've got to be doing this because you've chosen it. It cannot be somebody else's faith. You cannot be peer pressured into being a Christian. You got to want it. And you got to want it bad enough that when you blow it, because you will, you're going to have Peter moments. Peter denies Jesus 3 times, and it says he went his way, Jesus looked at him. Can you imagine that? Peter denies Jesus 3 times, and the third time he denies him, and he kind of looks up. Preachers do this. We look up, and every once in a while, like, we lock eyes with somebody in the audience. And what we typically do when we lock eyes with somebody, you ever been at a restaurant, you kind of were looking around, and then you locked eyes with somebody at another table that you didn't know, and what do? Kind of avert your gaze, because it's unnerving to lock eyes with somebody. Can you imagine locking eyes with Jesus right after you said, "I don't know that man"? And it says Peter went out and he wept bitterly. You're going to have bitter weeping moments in your faith where you have just failed. As a Christian I have a pretty regular study with, and we were going through James, and we meet in the mornings, and we were studying through James, and James talks about the tongue and how it's all this evil can come from it, and you have to bridle your tongue. We had this big, really rousing discussion about how important the words you use are, and then he left, right? And we parted ways and went about the rest of our day. He calls me later in the day. I just got to tell you, it's like everything I read this morning. We had this big conversation about how you're supposed to talk, and then I was like, I left, and I just immediately began to be the worst version of myself. I was unkind to my spouse. I was short with my kids. I got caught up in the wrong kind of joking and stuff like that at work. What's wrong with me? He was just so disappointed in himself, especially after that morning, right? It's like, that morning I read about how important bridling the tongue is. You're going to have bitter, weeping moments in your faith. And if your faith is a convenience, you know what you're going to do when it gets real bad? You say, I'm done with this. I'm just going to take a step back. You might not. Taking a step back might not look like I don't go to services anymore or I totally renounce my faith. It might look a little bit more like, you know what, I'm just not going to volunteer anymore. I'm not going to be on the duty roster. I'll be the last one in Sunday morning and the first one out. I'll sit on the edges of the flock. Don't do that. Don't do that with your faith. May it be a conviction for you. Because that's what it was for Peter. That's what it was for all of these people of Hebrews 11. The Gideons, the Baraks, the Samsons, the Jephthahs, the Sarahs. Convenience is what guys like Judas do. In Mark chapter 14, verse 11, it says, and when they heard it, they were glad, and they promised to give Judas money. So he sought how he might conveniently betray him. Betray Jesus. Judas walked with Jesus. As much as Peter did, as much as James and John, as much as Thomas. And yet this guy, it wasn't a conviction. He kept waiting, like, when do I get out of this? Right? That's how I always envision Judas, because as you put the pieces together, it seems that he had in his mind, he did believe that Jesus was likely, he's the Savior. You know, he'd seen the miracles, he'd seen all the stuff, so Jesus is the Christ we've been waiting for. But, you know, what do I get out of this deal? He's hitching his wagon to a stall, right? So this guy's an up-and-comer, and so when do I get my bit? And the other apostles had moments like that too. If you remember James and John, they had their mom, which is like the lowest move ever, to have your mother go and ask for it. Here, can you go and ask if we can sit on Jesus' right hand or left? Mom. And so she goes and asks, and Jesus makes it clear, that's not mine to give you. Now, to James and John's credit, the sons of thunder, what do? They go, okay. And they got in line, and they realized if that's not what this is about, Jesus is still the Christ. But Judas, on the other hand, his moment of betrayal happens right after a woman breaks a vial of perfume and anoints Jesus with it, and the perfume was worth a year's salary. Now, so this is like $65,000 worth of perfume. And he realizes in that moment, because Jesus says, look, you'll have the poor with you always, but you won't always have me. This woman is anointing me for burial. Judas, that's the moment, because Judas had tried. He said, man, we should have saved that. And the reason was, he was the treasurer. And if the money goes for the poor, guess who gets to skim off the top? Judas. And that was the moment where that guy realized, you know what? I don't think this is ever going to get me what I want. I'll tell you what, he was right. Those who did remain apostles, and then Paul who joined, and Matthias who joined, guess how all of them died? History says they died martyr's death. The only one, arguably, maybe didn't, was the Apostle John, who died an old man after, being tortured and put on an island. None of those guys got a great life here. And that's what Judas was looking for. He's like, well, I'll follow Jesus as long as Jesus makes my life better. Here's the news flash. Let me give you what took Judas 3 years of following Jesus to figure out. I'll skip to the end for you. Following Jesus will not make your life better here. It won't. It's not going to make it more convenient. It will make it harder. Now, it will give you more joy. But joy and fun and happiness are different things. Happiness happens to you. Joy is chosen. You can go through horrible things. Paul was in prison when he wrote in Philippians, rejoice always, and again I say rejoice. You can have joy, but your life will not get easier or get way more complicated if you trust Jesus. That's what Judas figured out. When he finally figured out, he said, let me find a convenient way to betray him and get some money out of him. This is how big of a deal convenience versus conviction are. Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5. A certain man named Ananias with Sapphira's wife sold a possession and he kept back part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware of it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. This is also convenience. They sold land and they gave a portion of it. Now, that's impressive. And this is right on the heels of Barnabas selling some land and giving all the money, and he got a nickname out of the deal. You back up one chapter from Acts 5 to Acts chapter 4, that's where Barnabas sells a tract of land. And it says that the apostles nicknamed him Barnabas, son of encouragement. Well, he becomes kind of famous within the church because here's a guy who owned land, sold it, and just gave the money so that the poor Christians, the Christians who were needy in Jerusalem could be taken care of. So these guys go, we got a plan. We're going to sell some land and we're going to give a portion of it. Now, that's impressive. The money's never the issue. Peter himself will tell them, look, you can give him part of it and then kept part for yourself. It was your land. You do what you want with it. The problem was the lie. The problem was that you wanted people to think of you a certain way without actually having to do it. You wanted to give part and keep part, but then have everybody think you gave whole. And that is one of the most dangerous things in Christianity. You can show up Sunday morning and make me think that you are all in with Christ. And then on a Tuesday afternoon, live for cruise. And I won't know. You can absolutely fool me. You can fool the brethren. You can 100% do it. But you cannot fool Jesus. You cannot fool the Holy Spirit. Because in Acts chapter 5, when Ananias and Sapphira are confronted on what they did, that's what Peter says. You have not lied to men, you have lied to the Spirit. If you think you can be a halfway Christian, it will not work. Or Demas. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 9 through 10, Demas is one of the saddest stories in all the Bible. Because Demas, Paul will mention him at various times and say, Demas is with me. So Demas was one of these guys that traveled with Paul. He was a traveling companion. He was helpful with Paul. He did all these things. But in 2 Timothy 4, so at the very end of Paul's life, he says to Timothy, be diligent to come to me quickly, for Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and has departed for Thessalonica. That just guts me. Because what Demas reminds me of is the fact that me being a good and faithful Christian today does not guarantee that I'll be faithful unto death. Jesus made it clear, each day has enough trouble of its own. I got to get up tomorrow and be a Christian. And then the next day, if I get a next day, I got to get up and be a Christian. I cannot ride the coattails of previous successes spiritually. And if we're not careful, that's what we do. We do a few things early on. We're passionate about God for a while, and then we get tired. And look, you will have in seasons and out of seasons of your faith. I'm not talking about I've discouraged and it's been a low time and I've been struggling, but I'm trying to be faithful, but it's just been hard. That's not what we're talking about. I'm not talking about wilderness times where it's like, man, you had your teeth kicked in and you're just kind of dragging and doing your best to just make it. I'm talking about, I did a few things, everybody now thinks of me a certain way, now I can coast. There is no cruise control for faith. Demas, at some point, found the glitter of this world and decided to set himself on cruise control. And it failed. Or Felix, in Acts chapter 24. When Paul spoke to Felix, he says he reasoned with him about righteousness and self-control and the judgment to come. And Felix was afraid. And he answered, go away for now. When I have a convenient time, I will call for you. One of the most dangerous lies the devil tells us is that you have time. You don't. Even if you do live another 50 years. I've had people say, well, yeah, like once I'm done having fun, then I'll commit myself to Christ. I'll get to it eventually. But that's a lie. Because here's the thing. Every decision you make shapes you. Every decision you make shapes you and makes you. Who I am today is not the guy I was 5 years ago. In fact, I don't know about you, but when I think about the guy I was 10 years ago, I don't even like that guy. Like, I wouldn't even want to hang out with decade ago me. That guy was a hot mess. And guess what I'm guessing is going to happen 10 years from now? Every once in a while I run into a Christian and they're like, I remember the first sermon you gave, and I go, I'm so sorry. Like, I changes you. So what makes you think that you can spend the next 10 years pursuing Satan and then wake up 10 years later and go, you know what? I'm ready for that Jesus thing. That's not how it works. That's the Felix mistake. I'll do this at a convenient time. It will never be convenient to be a Christian. It'll just be worth it. It'll just be worth it. We need to have biblical conviction in order to live as biblical people. In 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21, Elijah came near to all the people. He said, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? This is up on Mount Carmel in the Old Testament. And they were worshiping the idols, but also trying to worship Jehovah. And he goes, how long are you going to hesitate between two opinions? How long are you going to kind of try and live in both worlds? The technical thing that therapists will call this, when you try and live in two worlds, is cognitive dissonance. There's a person I'm supposed to be, and then there's the person I'm living. You cannot do it long term. Cognitive dissonance is not meant for human beings. How long are you going to hesitate between two opinions? Revelation 3:15 through 16. I know your deeds, that you're neither cold nor hot. This is the church at Laodicea. I wish that you were cold or hot. Pick one. Pick one. Cold water can be useful for some things. Hot water can be useful for some things. Lukewarm water, then pick one. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Joshua 24, verse 15. Joshua, in his final goodbye speech to the nation that he had led for a lifetime, he says, if it's disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Christianity is a choice, and it's your choice, and nobody's going to make it for you. I cannot preach a fiery enough sermon to make that choice for you. You cannot surround yourself with good enough people that they will just rise you to conviction. It is your choice, and all choices start with me looking at the guy in the mirror and saying, who am I going to be? Who am I going to be? Am I going to be a pew sitter? Like I just kind of last one in, first one out? Am I going to be somebody who is a Sunday-only Christian? Or is this who I am? Am I going to be this person so Jesus came back on a Tuesday afternoon and see, we all have in our mind, Jesus is going to return when I'm sitting in worship service. Probably not. What if he came back on a Tuesday afternoon? What would you be doing then? Would he still see your faith? Choose for yourself. Or in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 4 through 6. He says, there is one body and one spirit, just as you all called in one hope of your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. One of the mistakes that we make, and you use this verse a lot of times to talk about unity. And in fact, I will continue to use this verse throughout the week to talk about how the oneness of the Bible and the oneness of God. But right now, I'm not going to talk about it from a doctrine standpoint. I'm going to talk about it from a heart standpoint. What you tend to do as a human being is rationalize how God can be the way you want him to be. When I want to do something, I try and justify myself. It's the guy who said, well, who is my neighbor? Remember that lawyer? Who is my neighbor? When you attempt to justify yourself by changing who God is, it won't work. God is who he is. There is one God, and he's the same God today and yesterday and forever. And so the question I had out there to start the whole thing, what will leave you with? Why are you here? Because that's the only thing that's going to matter. Why are you here? Look at the person in the mirror. Choose your heart. And follow the one King who's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. At this time, is it typical we give an invitation at this point? Okay, well, good, because even if it wasn't typical, I was probably going to do it anyways. It is Typically, right after I finish a sermon, I offer an invitation. But I really want you to understand this is not my invitation. This is not the Scott invitation. This is an invitation from the Bible and from Jesus. Jesus is the one who said, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you peace." If you're not a Christian yet, He wants to be your King. He wants to save you. He wants to handle the burdens. Come forward. Let us know that you want to become a Christian. You want to be baptized, and we will help you. And if you are a Christian who's maybe you've been more on the convenience category, and you say, "No, it's time for conviction," I'll tell you, one of the best things that you can do is let other people know that you're making a change in your life, because that's how you choose accountability. I'm making a change, and I want your help. Would you all pray for me? If that's where you're at, we absolutely will. When we help you with either of those things, please come forward as we stand and sing.